former chiefs, Mr. Sisodia, the DG IDSA, Dr. Thomas Matthew, the DDG, scholars, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a privilege to be in front of you this afternoon and share a few of my thoughts on the topic which has been suggested, that is the Indian Air Force in the 21st century, challenges and opportunities. I propose to cover this with a very brief environment scan and then go on to discuss certain threat perceptions, the nature of conflicts, more importantly the role of aerospace power, the Indian Air Force itself, its modernization, challenges and future opportunities. History shows us that the global environment continually changes, sometimes in the predictable and evolutionary manner, and at others in a very random and revolutionary way. National institutions, therefore, must reflect realities, contemporary systems, and technologies. It's a continuous process of change and adaptation that is particularly necessary for the armed forces. One of the defining characteristics of the global geopolitical environment is that a nation's power is increasingly determined by its economic might and technological prowess rather than its military strength. Though interdependent, the most fundamental is economic strength, without which none of the other indices of power can be created or sustained. At the same time, economic growth is not guaranteed without the protective cover of military power, in what is referred to most commonly as the peace dividend. Popular phrases that describe today's world are interdependence, global village, a flat world, etc., etc. Certainly, there is heightened interaction and cross-pollination in every sphere. And this interdependence leads to a balancing of interests. Instead of the oft-repeated balance of power and the politics of confrontation has been replaced to a very large extent by the more nuanced competition and cooperation. Coming to Asia, it is the current powerhouse, and every major power has presence and very high stakes here. The Asian countries have greater influence around the world, and military capabilities are now substantial on the continent. The region is also witness to conflicts and instabilities as peoples attempt to reconfigure the settings, the reverberations of which are being felt around the world. It is also a region of nuclear proliferation and increasingly the cradle and playground of terrorism. India is situated in a turbulent part of this continent. Its size, resources, capabilities and growth also endow it with power, visibility, influence and responsibility. So what is the impact on our security and on our threat perceptions? Territorial disputes still linger. Our adversaries are militarily getting stronger. Cross-border terrorism and internal security challenges also persist. At the same time, trade and energy security add to our considerations and are a potential source of conflict. This encourages an outward orientation on our part, which is perhaps very good. Ideological divisions in the modern world still exist, but in other forms, such as democracies versus autocracies or fundamentalists versus the secular. These strains and tendencies exist within and outside our country and impact our security calculus. These turn into military aspirations that challenge national integrity. These have in the past sought to redraw some of the national boundaries, and many still abound, even drawing covert support from outside the country. If we were to include the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, then we collectively face a very serious threat indeed. Meeting these challenges requires understanding as well as very careful handling. Invariably, in these situations, one finds the lines between policing and military operations quite blurred. Yet another area of concern for us are ethnic Indian population resident in other parts of the world, which at times need our protection and support. There have been instances of this in the past. But on the flip side, migrant populations have changed the demographic character of our border threats and impacted their polity with attendant security connotations. We are all aware that non-traditional threats create crisis situations that in the end require the military's organizational capabilities and technical support. Keeping the peace is yet another important international commitment for the Indian Armed Forces. There is no longer the comfortable immunity from problems in some distant parts of the globe. This entwining of interests and effects can work both ways, and nations that anticipate and act will always have the advantage. It's not easy for a single nation to ensure peace and stability for itself today on its own. This encourages, indeed demands, international cooperation. This realization or compulsion is very visible the world over. India's international cooperation too has considerably increased, translating into increased engagement in all spheres, including military exchanges and interactions. The role of military diplomacy has also been enhanced. The significance of collective security and cooperative organizations has increased over time. India too seeks increased and active part in cooperative mechanisms, though joining collective security organizations is not and never will be our policy. An associated challenge sometimes is to prevent being subsumed by a more prolific and larger friend, but at the same time retain your independence. On the whole, India is faced with a full spectrum of threats, from the nuclear through conventional to conflicts limited in area, scope or objectives, and also the lower end of friction such as insurgencies, terrorism, etc. Moreover, India needs to be prepared for the escalation of conflict from limited, conventional to nuclear. The spectrum has also acquired a complexity and technological sophistication, making it prudent and necessary to move away from a threat-based preparation to a more accommodative and flexible, capability-based approach. This would help lessen the uncertainty and unpredictability because capabilities could then be very readily tailored to suit the challenge at hand. While the probabilities of total wars and extensive mobilizations may have reduced, India must still be prepared for a full-fledged and conventional conflict. Nuclear power play has increased in the region, which impacts postures and strategies. In a more integrated and independent world, the spillover of conflict in the neighborhood and its negative global consequences make it everybody's business. While there would be supporters for either party, the sum of international pressure would be to end conflict. Moreover, the battle spaces are now transparent to the public and legalities cannot be ignored. Therefore, limited but high-tech wars of high intensity are more likely. Aerospace power, ladies and gentlemen, has a distinct advantage in such a scenario. Determining the objectives and the end state in a limited war is critical, but poses a dilemma most of the times. Perceptions also matter. The Indian political military leadership must continually work for clarity in military objectives and the desired end states. While the future is uncertain, wars will be multidimensional, requiring an interdisciplinary approach and the marshalling of all organs of national power. Military power is a critical component of national power, without which, as history bears out, progress is possible only up to the point where it clashes with the interests of another stronger nation. Often, assumptions of conflicts and military capabilities are based on the classical war scenario. However, the Indian Air Force recognizes that complex military challenges require different force constructs for different situations, ranging from highly mobile and effective conventional forces to rapid reaction joint special forces. It is here that air power could provide the crucial edge. Clearly, future conflicts are likely to be short and sharp, more challenging and unpredictable, requiring a capability for assured, clean, swift, calibrated, varied and flexible responses, and a transportability of national power in all forms. Of all forms of military power, it is aerospace power that intrinsically possesses the characteristics that enable such responses. I am by no means lessening the import of other forms of military power, yet modern aerospace capabilities have as much or perhaps greater impact than what maritime power did for colonizing nations in the past. Unlike the latter, whose applicability is determined by a country's geographical location, and the land forces whose shape and size are determined by relations with neighbors, size of the country, and internal security compulsions, aerospace power has a more universal applicability. That is why even armies and navies strive to assimilate organic aerospace capabilities. Recent technological developments, including the synergy of air and space, have enhanced aerospace force unprecedentedly, making it astonishingly reliable, effective, clean and responsive, and always the preferred instrument in most situations of peace and in war. It has enabled effects-based operations, made simpler parallel operations, which create strategic effects with a very, very small footprint. Aerospace power is empowering and futuristic and easily lends its strengths and capabilities to other disciplines. In the Indian context, all forms of military power are necessary and important. However, the strategic aerospace power offers newer options both for our inherent northern and western concerns as well as for our outward orientations. I wish to highlight that aerospace power is inherently flexible and its application is not constrained by geographical areas. It can be easily assigned to any task on priority to attain the objectives, current or overall. The Indian Air Force's doctrines and plans have been founded accordingly. I mention this as some believe that air power doctrines are rigid and unaccommodative. Debates have taken place on counter-air operations vis-a-vis counter-surface force operations. It has been said that the IAF attributes less importance to the latter. But contrary to perception in some quarters, a large part of the Indian Air Force's effort in past conflicts has been in support of the surface battle. Our current plans too allocate a sizable portion of air effort towards CSFO. Now let's take a brief look at the Indian Air Force, its evolution, status, roles, goals, and what it is today. From counterinsurgency in its early years to army cooperation in World War II, the Indian Air Force was always considered a tactical force. Today, it is a strategic force, powerful, professional, and proven. Though the transition to strategic capability has been slow in coming, this process has been sustained, and if we are to effectively influence events within India's strategic boundaries, this needs to gain more impetus. In its 76th year, the Indian Air Force, with its fine combination of air warriors, machines, and ethos, has proved itself time and again. Status of the force and strength of the economy have boosted our international defense cooperation, including assistance to friendly air forces. Transcontinental reach has enabled exercises with friendly air forces on all continents, which is an excellent way to train, assimilate best practices, and strengthen our bonds of friendship. The Indian Air Force is also a sought-after contributor to United Nations peacekeeping operations. Currently, we have 4 very highly acclaimed missions in the Congo and Sudan. The Indian Air Force also remains at the forefront of the nation's disaster relief and humanitarian assistance missions. The Air Force's uniqueness lies in its rich all-terrain experience and its diverse inventory. Its capability and reach have enhanced significantly in the last decade. Given our situation, concerns, and aspirations, a strong and comprehensive aerospace capability is inescapable. The Indian Air Force's roles can be described as deterrence, punishment, protection, projection, and peacetime assistance. It will be readily apparent that India needs its Air Force to execute all of these. The Indian Air Force must be a strong deterrent in a tough neighborhood. Implicit in the deterrence is the ability for swift, calibrated, but effective punishment. Our deterrence currently includes the nuclear dimension. The Indian Air Force's primary and traditional role is protection or air defense, the scope of which will expand as do our interests and reach. A benign presence or assistance to friendly nations in distress is a projection of interest that the Indian Air Force would be expected to execute. This requires long-range presence, persistence, forward basing, and many other associated requirements. Perhaps the most visible demonstration and utility are peacetime applications, both internal and outside the country. They range from airlift and surveillance to possible offensive action. Military diplomacy is yet another aspect that has increased in recent years, yielding very handsome friendship dividends. Indeed, the Indian Air Force today is adequately suited and structured to execute these roles should the need arise. If we look at the way the Indian Air Force must evolve and compare it to any other evolving Air Force and the path charted by the advanced Air Forces, there are essential similarities. In fact, but for minor variations, we are on a globally recognized growth path. So depending upon the circumstances, threat perceptions and resources, it is the scope and pace of growth of the Air Force that essentially remain to be managed. Clearly, the Indian Air Force must be equipped for long reach, persistence, all-weather, precision, air dominance, networked and space-enabled force capabilities. I'm aware that not many Air Forces have such capabilities, but the Indian Air Force, among the leading Air Forces of the world today, can, with the right infusion of technology and training. The Indian Air Force is sensitive to the many competing demands of the nation and doesn't seek the best and now, but requisite capability in time to keep ahead of our adversaries. Requisite capability, well in time, right people, well organized for a short performance is a phrase that sums up our goal and our emphasis. Though we are a fairly balanced force, we also have shortages, reducing force levels and gaps in our inventory, which are being addressed with all urgency and governmental support. The Indian Air Force's modernization plan aims to sustain and enhance its operational potential and consolidate the specified force levels through judicious and cost-effective replacements and upgradation of existing resources. It's a gradual but transformational modernization. The approach we have adopted is three-pronged. Preserve your existing assets, upgrade those with residual life, and acquire new equipment. All fleets, including transports and helicopters with residual life, are being upgraded to contemporary standards. So also is operational and maintenance infrastructure and the logistic tools. The planned acquisitions are across the board and include platforms, weapons, sensors and equipment spread over the next 10 to 15 years. To run through some of our programs, the MiG-27 and Jaguar upgrades are almost done. The MiG-29, Mirage 2000 are being negotiated. The MiG-29 has been signed. The Mirage 2000 should happen very soon. Some aircraft of our transport and helicopter fleets will also follow soon. capabilities of our UAVs are being enhanced. Airfield and maintenance infrastructure are also being enhanced in a phased manner. The response to RFP for the MMRCA is expected soon. The Hawk AJTs have been inducted. The first AVAX will be with us at the end of this year. The first Boeing business jet for VVIP flight will be here with us next month. The contract for the C-130J Special Operations aircraft has been signed. We are in the final stages of negotiation for the induction of medium lift helicopters. The contract for ALHs has already been signed. We are also acquiring additional flight refueling aircraft. The first LCS squadron operational in the IOC configuration should be with us by 2010-11. The Indian Air Force also seeks new helicopters to replace the Chetaks, and the process for which has already begun. We are also in the process of issuing RFPs for heavy lift helicopters and attack helicopters. The intergovernmental agreements have been signed for the 5th generation fighter aircraft and the medium transport aircraft. Our air defense will be significantly strengthened with modern weapon systems and sensors, including the AVAX and aerostats. Integration of civil radars will commence this year with the Air Force radars. This will ensure a gap-free surveillance of the entire Indian airspace. Force multipliers, air dominance fighters, and a converged secure combat communication network, including the IACCS and the operational data link, will fundamentally alter the Indian Air Force's air defense doctrine. For effective command and control, extended reach, and to reduce the sensor-to-shooter loop, we are laying due emphasis on networks and space, which are the essential next steps. Ladies and gentlemen, I now turn to the challenges which face the Indian Air Force today. I am aware that in the challenges lie seeds of opportunity, and thus how we address them will qualify our future. Technology is at the core of an Air Force. Acquiring and assimilating it is our primary challenge. The lack of it curtails national options, impacting postures and doctrines. Denial and selective availability of technology are all enmeshed in international relations. As long as operationally feasible, the Indian Air Force supports the national quest for indigenization. We recommend acquisition of core technologies and core competencies and developing emerging technologies. We also recommend a collaborative and participative approach of partnerships between users, the DRDO, the industry, the government, and maybe foreign joint ventures. In these multiple partnerships, we believe that the user, that is us, must always be the captain. In these multiple, we also strongly support the government's endeavor to transform our current buyer-seller relationships to joint ventures, co-development, and co-production. While our response to technological challenges will determine the shape of things to come, maintenance challenges determine how long they last and their cost effectiveness. Maintainability, which includes logistical issues, is therefore extremely crucial. The Indian Air Force is proactive on this and has energized interaction with all vendors, suppliers whom we deal with, to enter into long-term spares and repair contracts. We've also put our materials management and equipment accounting online. Now let me come to the people and the organization. While hardware is important, it is converted into capabilities by people. Aerospace power especially requires very highly skilled and impeccably trained personnel. Also, in aviation, optimum performance usually lies close to safety margins, which brings in the concern of costs, both in human and material terms. Attracting quality youth, training and retaining them is another huge challenge for the Indian Air Force today. Inculcating qualities of leadership and innovativeness and ushering in meritocracy and productivity are extremely important on our agenda. However, the booming and expanding civil aviation sector exerts a huge pull on this resource, and we are doing our best to blend personal aspirations with organizational compulsions. We need government support to make this happen. Updating of skills is an associated challenge for which international exposure has been very useful. But in the long run, we might need perhaps an air university. Again, if our manning is adequate, we would be able to send our people on sabbaticals of higher learning. As the hardware changes, new capacities and capabilities are generated that sometimes radically alter the way we do business. And it is hard to do things differently with the old processes, interfaces, and organizational structures. Keeping pace and adapting to the changes as an organization is another huge challenge. I now turn to future opportunities. The most obvious and significant opportunity is already before us. I refer to our modernization plan. Ideally, modernization should be evolutionary and continuous. Yet, for a variety of reasons, the Indian Air Force has in the past modernized in spurts, often as a reaction to circumstances. Today, the Indian Air Force is in throes of a most comprehensive modernization, as I described earlier. We call it transformational, for it will change everything quite dramatically in the next 10 to 15 years. Being based on long-term perspective plans, most of it is already crystallized. Yet, a lot remains to be determined. Many new capabilities are still short of the decision stage. At this juncture, if we are able to synchronize these plans with national security objectives, we would really have utilized this opportunity very well. From that arises another opportunity that must be seized, and that is the formal enunciation of a long-term national security objectives, strategies, as well as a technological roadmap and indigenization strategies. These are all ensconced together. Much also depends upon the way aerospace power will develop in the future. Beyond the MMRCA and the fifth generation fighter aircraft with their 40-year lives, we are already in 2060. We are talking of 2060. It is not easy to guess the shape of aerospace power then. Would the accent shift to unmanned flight, to missiles, or would air be more of space? Technological advances are sure to revolutionize military affairs in the future also. Despite the unpredictabilities, it is certain that the need for application and transportability of national power, both hard and soft, and thus for aerospace power with enhanced fundamentals, will always remain. Nations that lack it will seek it, because aerospace power is bound to proliferate. We also expect aerospace power to permeate the national security apparatus more completely, including for homeland security. The Indian Air Force foresees greater specialization, tailored capabilities for each occasion, and increased dependence on unmanned vehicles, greater accent on force enhancers, particularly the intangible ones, such as the quality of people and their skill levels. Networking and assimilation of space, both of which are interdependent, are already the way forward and can tilt the balance quite considerably. A quiet space race is the current reality, and weaponization a distinct possibility. I'm talking of 2060, 2070. Perhaps more than any other, it is air power that is most significantly enhanced by the integration of space-enabled capabilities, for there are essential similarities, as I said earlier, between air and space. Evolving into an aerospace force is thus a very logical progression. But it is getting crowded up there, ladies and gentlemen, and we need to act fast. We need to get there before many others do. Certainly, space empowers all, and the Indian Air Force supports a tri-service approach towards this. Yet, any fledgling capability requires residing in an appropriate parent capability. Air power or the Indian Air Force are the closest such capability. I think perhaps the only organization to host and nurture military space. India's rising status and acceptability are an opportunity for us to push for creating an adequate military space capability. Since the Indian Air Force requires a comprehensive capability, its future in the long term will largely mirror the future of aerospace power itself. Though this path is invariably influenced by leading nations, India and countries like India must be selective and seek creative variations both in terms of hardware and doctrine. I have made mention earlier of India's outward orientation and the IAF's part in it. We find that our international interactions are increasing. Leading nations want to engage us and probably seek to include us in their calculations. Smaller nations look up to us for support, assistance and training. United Nations commitments are also considerable. We could ignore these opportunities, or we could use them to build Indian influence, general goodwill, and perhaps reap multiple dividends. I now turn to synergies and jointness, which the Indian Air Force is convinced is the way forward. Just as every tool has a place in the toolbox, every discipline too has its niche. At the edges of our competencies in complex tasks, we often confront impossibilities or failures. If we traverse the boundaries of our discipline into neighboring or related ones, we can, in concert with them, achieve our aims. In other words, there are other organs of national power, and we must learn to use them and interface with them effectively. Such synergy creates desired effects, perhaps at lesser cost and in quicker time. This calls for wisdom, knowledge of other disciplines, and lack of parochialism. The future also brings with it the opportunity for creating synergies and national capabilities. I feel, therefore, that the trick lies in perfecting internal core competencies, identifying complementary capabilities in other organizations, developing effective interfaces, and training to create and employ a new and an enhanced hybrid. We are convinced that such jointness is the way forward, and that core competencies of each service, indeed of all organs of national power, must be synergized to generate the required effect and capability. A capability-based approach from development to employment will encourage an interdisciplinary integration and the coming together of all organs of national power. At the end, it is the people that make an institution or a system work. The best ones can be rendered ineffective for want of skills and commitment, and vice versa. Essentially, we believe jointness and synergy have less to do with new structures and ownership, but depend upon joint thinking, planning, capability creations, as well as joint training and execution. Perhaps it is better to grow in a very evolutionary manner. Similarly, it is also imperative that military and civil aviation integrate to take advantage of each other's capacities for better efficiency, cost effectiveness, and for greater options. We have already made available 19 of our frontline airfields for civil air traffic to share with us, and also have permitted transit through our airspace, which saves a lot of time and fuel as far as the civil airliners are concerned. The Indian Air Force has also proposed the flexible use of airspace, and the process for integration of civilian and Air Force radars has commenced. Beyond generating national synergies, aerospace technologies are so expensive, cutting edge, and hard to develop that I dare say our quest of these increasingly encourages joint ventures and sharing of knowledge and resources between nations and accord opportunity to forge international synergies. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, considerable changes are taking place in the global and regional scenario and in our neighborhood. Old issues persist while newer concerns are added. The role of military power has increased as security concerns spread beyond national boundaries. Aerospace power is futuristic and is becoming increasingly utilitarian. The Indian Air Force has come a long way and has demonstrated its professionalism, and the world has acknowledged it. A strong and professional Indian Air Force can contribute to national options and to peace and stability not only within the country but also in the region. It is a considered opinion that the Indian Air Force, with its current capability and plans, has the potential to make a very significant impact on the postures we adopt in the future. The Indian Air Force must therefore grow in step with the nation. Thank you for your patience, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm open to questions now.